Okay, so we're here to talk about minds and bodies, monism, dualism, and idealism. This is an area of philosophy called philosophy of mind. So let's think back to activity 2 when we read Descartes' meditations on first philosophy, or the first two meditations anyways. Now, this text had a major impact on philosophers in the 17th and 18th centuries, who are also called Enlightenment philosophers. And the groundbreaking moment in this text for Descartes was his famous I am, I exist, or I think, therefore I am argument. The Latin translation for this phrase is cogito ergo sum, and sometimes it is referred to as just the cogito. Now, if you haven't thought about this phrase yet, I encourage you to do so, and I encourage you to review the section on Descartes in Activity 2 if you haven't really thought about the significance of this argument yet, before going any further. Okay, so Descartes used the cogito to prove that the mind exists. In fact, he was more certain of his mind existing than the existence of the physical world, because while he can doubt his senses, he cannot doubt his own existence. Throughout the rest of the meditations, Descartes seeks to prove a number of things, such as the permanence and persistence of physical reality as it appears to the mind. And this is the wax argument that Descartes gave. The wax argument was that basically, if you're looking at a candle and the candle melts and it turns into something that looks nothing like a candle, you still know that it is a candle. You still know that it is the same thing. And so he used this example to suggest that we have a rational understanding that reality is permanent and it persists and through time, so that things do not immediately become something else. Now that is something you can argue with, but that was part of the meditations. The second part is where he tries to prove the existence of God through what are called cosmological and ontological arguments. Now we're not going to cover those yet because we have philosophy of religion coming up, but just that's another part of the meditations. And the third part is where he tries to suggest that the existence of physical reality, or that physical reality exists because God would not deceive us. And that has been a very controversial part of Descartes' argument. Nonetheless, some parts of Descartes people accept, other parts people reject, but his meditations were very influential. And part of the influence of his meditations has to do with the model of reality that he thinks of. So Descartes also argues that mind and body, otherwise known as mental reality and physical reality, are two completely different substances that make up reality. This is known as Cartesian mind-body dualism, and Cartesian just means of or related to Descartes. You can see that the name sort of looks similar. Okay, so sometimes this model of reality is referred to as the ghost in the machine. And the thought is that there's this ghost, which is a mind, existing in the machine of the body. Descartes actually thought that there was a location in the brain where the physical reality, the brain, connected with mental reality, the mind or the soul, and he identified this as the pineal gland. Scientists have since disproven that there's any sort of connection between the two. Now, why did Descartes believe in mind-body dualism? Well, there certainly seems to be a difference between what goes on in your mind and what goes on in the external world. As we saw in the first activity, the world as it appears to us in our minds seems to be a limited representation of the external world. For instance, we only see a limited part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and we hear a limited part of the auditory spectrum as well. There's a lot going on in the world that we are not aware of through the filter of our sensations. So everything we experience goes through a major sensory and interpretational filter. And we can include in that culture, and we can include our upbringing, and we can include our preconceptions, our stereotypes. All of these things filter and adjust the way that we interpret the world. So the world in our mind seems to be completely separate from the external world, if there is an external world, and we'll get to that kind of doubt later. But how do minds and bodies interact if they are completely different substances? Clearly, our minds communicate with and have control over our bodies. So I have control over my hand movements that I'm using to gesture right now, and the words that I am speaking right now, I have control over that in my mind. But conversely, also our bodies communicate with and to a certain extent have control over our minds. If I injure myself, I involuntarily feel pain. If I get brain damage, my mind may even be completely altered. So our bodies will impact our minds. If our bodies and our minds are completely different substances, or independent realities, then how is all of this interaction possible? Descartes' pineal gland explanation does not satisfy modern scientists or philosophers, as we've suggested. Scientists are often monists and materialists. So monism is the belief that there is only one substance, only one kind of reality. And many scientists will tell you that that one reality is physical reality. Materialism is the belief that all of reality is physical. It's just matter and energy. Just like God, spirits, and ghosts, the mind, if it exists, is not a physical or material thing that is empirically verifiable. The mind is different from the brain, but the mind as that kind of a concept is not empirically verifiable, meaning you can't measure it. So in other words, scientists cannot measure the mind in any way or put it through experiments. They can certainly put the brain under the microscope and look at that. But if the mind is something non-material, then it does not consist of matter or energy. It consists of a distinct mental substance that has fundamentally different properties than physical substance. Materialists argue that the only thing we can claim to be real is that which exists in the physical universe and is empirically verifiable through science. So that's measurable matter and energy. So to them, the mind as an independent substance is an illusion. It is an illusion created by the sum of processes that occur within a collection of atoms and energy in the brain. So anything that we call the mind, anything that we call our spirit, our soul, our free will even, all of that is an illusion created by this collection of atoms and energy and all of those interactions that occur in our brain. This view considers all of reality, including our brains, minds, souls, and spirits, to be machine-like or mechanical. It suggests that humans are really just complicated organic machines. But there are problems with materialism too. Despite its scientific acceptability, there are problems with the materialist conception of reality. Maybe it's just ego, but aren't we more than just complex machines? After all, a machine can't say, "I think, therefore I am," and understand why that matters. A machine can't experience reality as you do. It does not have a perspective, sensations, consciousness, emotions, intentional thought, free will, self-awareness, or any of the other things associated with the minds of human beings. Now, one might say, well, a machine can't do that yet. But there are, of course, lots of science fiction flicks and lots of suggestions that artificial intelligence might be a reality someday. And so maybe if artificial intelligence actually becomes a reality, then we won't be able to distinguish humans from machines like this. Okay, so anyways, so if we are just machines, then do any of these things really exist? They certainly seem to exist. After all, we have a direct experience of them, and only indirect experience of everything else in the world through the imperfect filter of our sensations. So think about it. Do emotions exist? Does intentional thought exist? Does free will exist? Does self-awareness exist? All of these things seem to be counter to the materialist conception of reality. Arguably, I have more first-hand certain knowledge of the existence of free will, emotion, and the self than I do about anything else, including science. Descartes' "I think, therefore I am" necessitates the existence of consciousness, doesn't it? Didn't he show that we are necessarily more certain about the existence of our own consciousness than we are about even the existence of the external world? Because we can doubt our senses, but we can't doubt cogito ergo sum. So there is a third possibility. Although it is counter to our common sense, perhaps physical reality is the illusion, and mental reality is what is real. Perhaps this mental reality is shared between us somehow, so that we, in some respects, have a common consciousness. This view is called idealism. We will encounter several idealist philosophers throughout the course, one of whom is Plato. Okay, so we've covered 3 different philosophies of mind, the 2 most common being monism and dualism, and the third being idealism. Materialism and dualism, the third being idealism. Both idealism and materialism are a form of monism, because they both think that reality is one thing rather than 2 distinct things. I should make that very clear. We've also covered some of the problems with both materialism and dualism. So take a close look at those and review those, because they're going to be important and they can be difficult to grasp. You just had a crash course in an area of philosophy called philosophy of mind. There are whole courses and even careers dedicated to studying this topic, but for now we will limit ourselves to one activity. In addition to this slide, there are readings and videos that I'd like you to watch to further develop your understanding. There's a lot more to talk about in this area of philosophy. We're getting into deep philosophy now, so give it a shot, and don't forget to email me with questions. And don't worry if you don't understand it the first time around, okay? Sometimes philosophy requires you to read things or think about things several times before you really get it. And I'll say that in philosophy there's not always as much work as in other courses, but the work can be very demanding and can require you to think a lot. So don't give up if you're feeling overwhelmed. Please just send me an email. Hopefully I can help you. And and hopefully you're getting interested in this stuff, and hopefully it's going to be mind expanding for you. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks.